You're not on the obituary, Celeste. Maybe that says enough. That's what my cousin whispered, right after they burned the will in front of me. No one stopped her. Not when she called me a guest. Not when my grandfather's name was twisted into leverage. But I remember the last time I held his hand. How he whispered, "Some truths will burn." Let them. What they didn't know was, I remembered everything, and when they tried to erase me, they forgot one thing. I still had his voice. If you've ever been treated like a stranger in your own family, drop a 1 in the comments. If you've never felt that sting, drop a 0. Because sometimes being cast out is the only way to finally step into your own name. They called me a guest, not family. I should have walked out then. The Darnell estate hadn't changed much since my childhood. The same narrow driveway lined with crumbling stone lions. The same frosted windows casting distorted reflections of Christmas lights, flickering as if unsure of their welcome. I paused at the threshold, fingers brushing the navy wool of my coat, Mother's coat. The sleeves are still too long, swallowing my wrists like they had all those years ago. It was the only thing of hers I had left. Inside, cinnamon-scented candles wrestled with the smell of aging wood and lemon polish. The parlor was as drafty and cold as I remembered, its walls lined with ancestral portraits, each gaze seeming to disapprove of my presence. Mr. Wren stood by the fireplace, adjusting his glasses. "Celeste, you may take a seat," he said, without looking directly at me. I nodded and found an empty chair at the farthest end of the room. No one moved to greet me. Marina's eyes slid over me like I was part of the wallpaper. Graham sipped something brown from a crystal glass, his arm lazily draped over the back of the sofa. Elaine scrolled through her phone with perfectly manicured fingers. I wasn't expecting... Marina's voice cut the silence. Her. "She has every right to be here," Mr. Wren said coolly, producing a thick cream-colored envelope. "As per Bernard Darnell's last will and testament." My heart jolted. The last time I saw Grandfather alive, he'd held my hand and whispered, "Some truths will burn, Celeste." Let them. I hadn't known what he meant, until now. Mr. Wren cleared his throat and began. "To my granddaughter, Celeste Darnell, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all liquid and fixed assets, amounting to $29 million. The room didn't fall silent. It detonated. "That's preposterous!" Marina stood up so quickly, her wineglass tipped, the red liquid spreading like blood across the rug. "She manipulated him. He was ill, confused." Graham chuckled darkly. "This is a joke, right?" Elaine said nothing, just widened her eyes in a theatrical show of innocence. "I have the signed documents here," Mr. Wren said, voice level. "Witnessed, notarized, all legal." Marina lunged forward and snatched the document from his hand. "This is a forgery." She walked to the fireplace, turned, and without a second thought, threw the pages into the flames. I jumped to my feet. "What are you doing?" "Restoring balance," Marina hissed. "You don't belong here. You never did." The fire crackled, devouring the will. I stood frozen, my chest hollow. And yet, I wasn't surprised. It was just like Thanksgiving 5 years ago, when they made me sit at the kids' table, while even Elaine's college roommate got a place with the adults. I smiled then, swallowing the humiliation. But this was different. I turned to Mr. Wren. "Do you have a backup?" He hesitated. "There are digital copies, but they'll deny everything," I whispered, more to myself. Marina stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You're not one of us. Never were." The flames behind her crackled louder. I watched as the last of my grandfather's handwriting curled into ash. When I returned home, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at my old family photo, grandfather's hand resting on my shoulder, our smiles frozen in a silver frame. That very photo had disappeared from the parlor mantel today. I remembered it being there when I was 12. Had they removed it, or had I imagined its existence? I reached for my laptop and tried to log in to the patient portal. Just a routine check, I told myself. A distraction. But the system flashed back. No records found. Odd. I tried again. DMV. Social Security. Even a silly library card I hadn't used in a decade. Invalid identification, the screen repeated. Again and again. The silver light from the screen flickered across my coat, still buttoned tight. I hadn't taken it off since I got home. Something about its weight anchored me, reminded me I still existed. At least in thread and wool. A sudden chill made me glance toward the window. I thought I saw a figure across the street, standing still under the lamppost, coat collar up. Watching. But when I blinked, they were gone. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe not. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. But that night, I couldn't find my name in the system either. My debit card declined. The account closed. The woman at the bank stared at me like I was a ghost. I stood there, still gripping the edge of the counter, my breath fogging the glass between us. The teller blinked at the screen again and repeated, "There's no record of this account, ma'am." Ma'am. Like I was someone else entirely. I leaned in, voice shaking. "It was active last week. It was over $10,000. She shrugged, almost apologetic, but mostly afraid. I saw it in her eyes. That flicker people give when something doesn't add up, and they'd rather it just disappear. I walked out into the cold with the kind of hollow that made your bones ache. It had started drizzling, a thin gray mist that wrapped the sidewalks and streets in something heavy and forgetful. Charleston in December was always moody, but today it felt menacing. Back in my apartment, I pulled my coat tighter. The heater rattled like it was trying to wake the dead, but couldn't quite manage. I tried logging into my online banking account. No success. My account didn't exist. No error message. Just blank. As if I'd imagined it. As if I was the error. I thought about something grandfather once said, in that half-laughing, half-serious way of his. In this family, blood means little. Paper means everything. And now the paper trail of my life was dissolving like it had never been printed. Rent was due in 2 days. I searched the corners of my kitchen for spare change, like some washed-up cliché. Then I remembered. The book. One of grandfather's old favorites. He always left things tucked between the pages. It was the only thing I had left from him that hadn't been burned or boxed away. I trudged to the Charleston Public Library, coat soaked halfway through by the time I arrived. I made my way to the familiar aisle. Historical politics, 3rd row, 2nd shelf from the top. The book was there. America, Empire, and Inheritance, the same cracked spine. I pulled it open, heart pounding. There it was, a small rusted USB wrapped in a faded receipt from 1997. A note, scrawled in his neat cursive. For Celeste, in case they win. I stared at it, gripping the plastic between my fingers like it might explain everything, or explode. My breath came in shallow. I walked to the computer terminal in the back corner, the one no one ever used because the screen flickered. When I plugged it in, a folder popped up. Error. Real inside encrypted files. Dozens of them. Legal documents, letters, audio recordings. I couldn't tell yet. My hands were shaking too much. But something in me settled just a little. Grandfather had known. I felt the presence before I saw it, a movement in the corner of my eye. Through the rain-streaked window, someone stood across the street. Same figure I'd seen twice this week, same coat, same scarf, my mother's scarf, light blue with a frayed edge, one I hadn't seen in years. They didn't move, neither did I. Later, in the dimness of my apartment, I tried to call Mr. Wren. Voicemail. Then I remembered Melba, grandfather's old friend, the one who brought fig preserves to every 4th of July. I found her number scribbled inside one of my mother's recipe books. Celeste? Her voice cracked like dry leaves. Something's wrong, I whispered. I think they're trying to erase me. She was quiet for a long while. Then, Bernard always said, she's the only Darnell I trust to walk away from the fire, not feed it. He meant you, darling. They're afraid of what you know, or what you might find. Before I could respond, the line dropped. Have you ever felt like you were being erased, not just from memories, but from existence itself? If you've been made to question your very place in your own story, drop a comment number 7 below. Now, let's see what happened next. I sat there for a while, staring at the silent phone. Then I flipped open my notebook and jotted every detail I could remember. The scarf, the receipt, the folder name. Air. Real, I underlined it twice. The next morning, I returned to the library early. I didn't trust that USB would still work much longer. I borrowed a headphone set and opened one of the audio files. Static, then grandfather's voice. If you're listening to this, it means I didn't outlive the noise. But maybe you will. Truth doesn't scream, Celeste. It endures. I rewound that last line. Listened again. Wrote it down. A librarian passed behind me and paused. Is that Bernard Darnell? She asked softly. I nodded. He used to sit here for hours, she said, her eyes distant. Always scribbling. I asked once what he was working on. He said, something they can't rewrite. She smiled and walked off. I opened a government records database and typed my name. No matches, no birth certificate, no social security number, no death. Just nothing. Like I'd been scraped off the page. I pressed a hand to my chest, felt my own heartbeat just to be sure I was still here, still real. I whispered into the cold air, who am I to them, really? Then the lights in the library flickered. The obituary was one paragraph. Survived by his beloved children. I wasn't listed. The words blurred as I read them again, trying to find my name in a sea of absence. I folded the obituary in half, tucked it into my coat pocket, and leaned back in the wobbly chair of my kitchen nook. The only sound was the gentle hum of the fridge and the soft rustle of wind outside. Beloved children. That wasn't me, apparently. I turned the USB over in my fingers, the faded label barely legible. There was only one file not yet opened, audio. When I finally pressed play, grandfather's voice filled the apartment like warm molasses, slow and thick with feeling. If you're hearing this, Celeste, then the shadows have done their part, but I trust you've stepped into the light. He spoke about legacy, not inheritance, about names that hold weight and others that get washed away like chalk on rain-soaked pavement. They are my blood, but you are my legacy. I don't remember when I started crying. Maybe it was around the time he said he regretted the silence, or when he called me brave. I only know that my tears dried slowly as his message ended with one final instruction. Go see Jasper Bell. The old records vault smelled like wood polish and mothballs, the kind of place time forgets. Jasper was lean, his hair wispy gray, eyes sharp as nails. He barely said hello before opening a drawer filled with manila folders. Bernard left this for you. Said you'd understand better in pieces than all at once. I scanned the logs, entries, revisions, sealed envelopes. Marina's name was scribbled and crossed out twice. Denied entry. She had tried to access the vault the day after his death. Jasper pulled out a birth certificate. I recognized the paperweight of truth. It was mine, but altered. My name erased in red ink, replaced with a series of dashes. It was legal, dated, notarized. I felt the room tilt. He protected you the only way he could, Jasper said, sliding over another file. My hands trembled as I opened it. Encrypted notes, scanned documents, and a copy of a handwritten will. Unsigned but unmistakably grandfather's handwriting. I needed air. I walked to Café Anatole, where I used to study in college. The jazz music still played. The same mellow trumpet grandfather used to hum along to. I ordered the same thing I always did, a black coffee and a slice of almond tart, and sat at the corner table by the fogged window. My mind raced. If they'd taken my name off legal documents, what else had they rewritten? I dug into my old college books that I'd stashed in the closet earlier this year, hoping to find distraction. A crumpled page slipped out. Sat notes I'd scribbled in highlighter. Legacy doesn't guarantee greatness. I must have been angry when I wrote that, but I'd gotten in, on my own, without help. That reminder settled like armor around my spine. Back at the vault, Jasper had one last folder in his hands. He looked hesitant. That alone terrified me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. He hesitated. "Something I wasn't supposed to give you unless things got dangerous." His voice echoed in my apartment long after the recording ended. I sat still, rewinding the message, just to hear him say my name again. "You were never meant to follow their path, Celeste. That's why I left you the map." The phrase made little sense, but I clung to it, hoping the next clue would give it shape. When I turned back to Jasper, he told me about the last time he saw grandfather. "He looked tired," Jasper said, pouring tea from a chipped pot. "But not weak. He came in here with that folder you saw, signed it without shaking. Then he sat down and cried." That image undid something in me. I had never seen Bernard cry, not even when we buried Grandma. He said he owed someone the truth. That silence had been his biggest failure. Jasper handed me a smaller envelope. Inside were a series of slips, birth dates, hospital notations, initials. One entry was mine, scratched out. Beneath it, in Bernard's handwriting, "She is not theirs to erase." At Café Anatole, I lingered longer than I needed. My coffee went cold. The tart crumbled untouched. The music spun its spell. Notes Bernard used to hum while stirring honey into tea. I remembered our walks, how he'd point out trees and call them by name, saying each had a memory. "This one remembers your 7th birthday," he once said under a blooming dogwood. Back home, I dug through the box of old school files I'd almost thrown away. Hidden inside a yearbook was a sheet of paper that didn't belong. Typed, official. A school transfer record. Only it listed me as deceased. Date, 3 years ago. The same month grandfather had fallen ill. I staggered backward, clutching the file like it might burn me. If someone had declared me legally dead, then who exactly had I been since? A ghost? An erasure in progress? That's when I returned to Jasper, and he offered me that final folder. My fingers hovered over it, too afraid to open, too afraid not to. I look at the last folder in Jasper's hands. Proof of death, Celeste Darnell. I didn't exist on paper, but the fire in my chest? That felt very real. Sylvia Moran's office didn't look like a place where battles were fought, but then again, neither did I. The wood-paneled walls hummed with old clock ticks and quiet authority, and somewhere between the smell of sandalwood and old books, I felt myself straighten up. I slid the USB across the polished desk. She didn't flinch. She just inserted it, adjusted her reading glasses, and opened the first file. My name, my face, my erasure. "You see this line?" she said, highlighting the metadata. This edit wasn't casual. It was systematic. Someone with estate access and digital authorization did this. Likely Marina's lawyer, but done in a way that leaves no direct fingerprints. My hands were fists in my lap. "Is it reversible?" She nodded slowly. "If we move quickly, and if we find at least one original, unaltered legal document signed by Bernard, we can apply under the Dormant Identity Protocol, but we need to be thorough." We walked to the courthouse together in a kind of silence only two women planning war could share. The building loomed gray against a rainy Charleston afternoon. At the archive window, Sylvia slid her credentials across to the clerk, who looked at me too long before muttering, "Name sounds familiar." The request form crinkled slightly under my pen. I wrote Celeste Darnell slowly, deliberately, like etching something back into existence. On the way back, Sylvia's phone rang. She stared at the screen, then answered. Her voice turned cold. "Defamation? Is that what you're calling it now?" Pause. "Yes, Marina, I'm her counsel. And no, you don't scare me." She hung up and smiled at me, not kindly, but fiercely. That night, I spread every paper I owned across my living room floor. Birth certificate, school transcripts, the lease for my apartment, Bernard's old notes. I started making copies. One set went under the floorboard. Another taped behind the refrigerator. One inside a hollowed-out cookbook. If someone wanted to erase me again, they'd have to work harder. I boiled water for tea, but forgot the cup. The whistle of the kettle echoed off the windows, shrill and familiar. I stood there, breathing, feeling the weight of myself return. Sylvia poured us both a cup of black tea as the rain outside began tapping harder against her office window. She spoke slowly, her voice low but full of conviction. "You'd be surprised how many women I've met like you. Stripped from ledgers, cut out photographs. One client's mother wasn't even mentioned in the obituary after 50 years of marriage. It's always the paper trail they attack first, because that's what the law recognizes." That hit me hard. I thought of how quiet grandfather had grown the last year of his life. Not distant, but careful. His letters had turned vague, his handwriting tighter. I remembered one envelope he mailed with nothing inside but a pressed magnolia bloom. Back then, I thought it was a mistake. Now, I wasn't so sure. When I got back to my apartment, I sifted through the oldest boxes in my closet. College papers, receipts from grocery stores long gone. In one envelope labeled Winter 2011, I found a holiday card from Bernard, just one line in his handwriting. "You've already become more than they'll ever admit." It stung, but it steadied me. I folded the card and tucked it into my coat pocket. Every layer mattered now. Around midnight, I ventured out to the community storage unit I'd rented under a pseudonym weeks ago. The cold air bit at my knuckles as I unlocked it and stacked several labeled containers inside. Copies of the USB files, the altered birth certificate, and now the holiday card. Each box had instructions taped beneath the lid. Who to contact, what to say, when to speak. They wouldn't just erase me, not without a trace. As I stood there, the sound of the wind curling around the alley reminded me of grandfather humming while trimming rose bushes. I closed my eyes and mouthed the words he always said when he handed me shears. "Cut only what cannot heal." This wasn't just about inheritance or paper. This was about memory, about truth. I turned off the storage light and walked home. Somewhere deep beneath the magnolia tree, the final word waited, written in dirt, in ink, in defiance. I remember a diary entry, one Bernard scribbled in his garden ledger. If it's still buried under the magnolia tree, it could save me. They said I forged the papers, but I let the courtroom hear his voice. The courtroom smelled like old varnish and nerves. Heavy air wrapped around my shoulders as I stepped up to the stand, clutching nothing but truth and a yellow folder. I could feel every eye tracing my silhouette, waiting for a mistake, for tears, for anything to confirm the narrative they'd already decided. But I wasn't there for them. The judge's voice, firm and impartial, echoed through the paneled room. "Miss Darnell, you may proceed." I nodded once, then reached for the flash drive Sylvia had triple-checked. She slid it into the courtroom laptop and gave me the smallest nod of confidence. And then Bernard's voice filled the room. He didn't sound sick. He didn't sound old. He sounded certain. "To whom this may concern," he began, "I, Bernard Darnell, in full capacity, amend my last will. I name Celeste my heir not for blood, but for truth. She has borne burdens in silence. Now let her carry the name with clarity." No one breathed, not even Marina. Sylvia followed with the physical letter, creased, water-stained, but still in Bernard's own hand, and the page from his garden ledger. The ink had faded, but the signature had not. "He cried when he signed that," Jasper Bell's voice rang from the back. He stood now, older than I remembered, but steadier than anyone else in the room. "Marina Darnell," the judge said, shifting focus. "You wish to challenge this amendment?" She stood, chin up, shoulders rigid. He was coerced, manipulated. She isolated him from the rest of us. Sylvia's cross-examination was brief, but sharp as glass. Dates, records, the list of Bernard's visitors, security logs from Jasper's archive vault, all laid out with quiet precision. Marina faltered once, then again. Graham leaned away from her. Elaine glanced at the exits. The ruling didn't thunder. It arrived like winter, brisk, absolute. "Miss Darnell is the rightful heir," Judge Callahan declared. "This court sees no evidence to the contrary and no merit in continuing this charade." The gavel dropped. Flashbulbs exploded as I exited down the courthouse steps. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. But Jasper's nod from the sidewalk steadied something inside me. At the bottom stair, Sylvia turned to me. "You good?" I looked to the sky, slate gray, with sleet just beginning to fall. "Good enough to keep walking." We passed reporters shouting my name. One even asked how it felt to be vindicated. But the truth doesn't yell back. In the parking lot, Graham avoided my gaze. Elaine had already disappeared. And Marina, she waited. Just long enough to brush past me and whisper. As I leave the courtroom, Marina brushes past and whispers, "He should have burned you too." We didn't return to Sylvia's office immediately. I needed air, not walls. So we walked toward the fountain across Meeting Street, where Bernard once bought me a root beer float after I won a spelling bee. My coat was too thin, but memory warmed better than fleece. A small crowd had followed. Some recorded. Some watched in silence. But one woman, maybe in her 60s, stepped forward and simply said, "He'd be proud of you." I didn't know her, but I believed her. Sylvia turned her face into the wind and muttered, "I've seen men rewrite their wills out of fear." Bernard rewrote it out of faith. Inside her office, the yellow legal pad sat open with today's date already scribbled in a corner. The quote on the wall, "Justice isn't blind. She just needs better glasses," felt less like decoration now and more like defiance. We reviewed the court transcript together. Every word said, every name recorded. Bernard's voice is captured in digital permanence. Then Sylvia paused. There's one thing left. You could press charges for forgery, conspiracy. Marina went too far. I stared at the paper. The weight of it. No, I said. Let her stew in silence. That's worse for people like her. Have you ever had the chance to fight back, but choose peace instead? That moment when silence says more than shouting ever could. If that speaks to you, drop a comment number 9 below. Let's see how it all ends. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing the edge of the court's stamped letter with my finger. The radio played low jazz, something old, something Bernard loved. And in that moment, I knew. This was never just about inheritance. It was about erasure and survival. My name was mine again, and no one, no fire, no lie, no courtroom could take it now. Before heading to bed, I tucked the ledger page into a plastic sleeve, then slid it beneath the floorboard by my bed, the same spot I used to hide birthday cards. Some things, even now, deserved sacred ground. I didn't reclaim a mansion, I reclaimed myself. The sky was pale that morning, thin clouds stretching like silk across the marsh. I didn't need to be anywhere, yet my steps led me to the local library, Bernard's journals tucked in a cloth bag. They felt heavier than I remembered, but maybe that was grief, settled into the spine of everything I carried. The librarian greeted me with a quiet nod. No fanfare, no questions. I offered the bag and whispered, "For the archive." He wanted stories to outlive noise. She smiled and stamped the inside cover with care, in memory of those who remembered first. I declined every interview request that week. No cameras, no headlines, just the ache of stillness and the promise of air finally unthickened by war. Back in my apartment, I sat cross-legged by the kettle, surrounded by papers, memories, and the magnolia necklace I'd once found in Bernard's drawer. It now rested beside the envelope I'd written the night before, addressed to myself at age 13. I sealed it with the quiet reverence usually reserved for prayers. Later, I walked to Café Anatole one final time. The same jazz tune played overhead. I ordered tea, sat in the corner booth, and opened his final note again. Legacy isn't what we leave, it's who we let remember us. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Not yet. As I sipped slowly, a boy at the next table flipped through a copy of The Wind in the Willows, Bernard's favorite. His legs swung beneath the seat, untethered, free. When he looked up and caught my eye, he smiled, and it startled me how something so small could feel like recognition. The waitress, Maria, I think her name was, recognized me. "You used to study here," she said, her voice kind. "Quiet one, always brought your own tea bags." I smiled. "Still do." She laughed and walked away, and for a moment, I remembered finals week, how Bernard used to drop off a warm sandwich without saying a word. Just a wink. I once asked why he did it. "To remind you you're not invisible," he said. At the table, I pulled out a notebook and began writing again. Not legal notes, not defense points, just pieces of memory I didn't want to lose. The way my mother hummed while washing dishes, the soft rhythm of her fingers combing through my hair before school. I thought I had lost that sound, but now it rose inside me. Half lullaby, half promise. After leaving the cafe, I passed the florist's stall on Broad Street and paused. The woman there offered me a single magnolia bloom. No charge. "You look like you could use something that survives storms," she said. I tucked the blossom into my coat pocket and walked on. Back home, I opened Bernard's old tin box, the one he kept for receipts and worn photographs. I placed my final item inside, a blue fountain pen he gave me the day I graduated. He'd said, "Sign your life. Don't let anyone else do it for you." That night, I made one last addition to the letter to my younger self. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's walking forward without dragging their weight behind you. And then I turned off the lights. The room fell into a hush, save for the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the distant rustle of magnolia petals against the siding. I didn't fear the silence anymore. I belonged to it. I sipped the last of my tea and pressed play on Bernard's message, one final time. Not for clarity, but for comfort. His voice filled the room, steady and unyielding. "I chose you because you remember, Celeste. And memory? Memory is how we survive." I closed my eyes, let it wash over me. As I walk home, I hear a voicemail from an unknown number. "Celeste, there's something else you should know. About your mother. I used to think reclaiming what was mine would feel like triumph. But it felt quieter than that, like a breath after too long underwater. What I've learned is this. Truth doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives in silence, settles into your bones, and simply lets you rest. I no longer chase approval, I protect peace. Because in the end, family isn't just who shares your name, but who honors your truth. If my story stirred something in you, feel free to share a moment from your own journey in the comments below. Or simply hit subscribe if you'd like to walk with me through the next one. Thank you for listening. Until next time.